It's time for Promoter 101, the podcast, hosted by Steiny.
Welcome to Promoter 101.
The founder and co-host of this podcast is a man who doesn't need an introduction, but we're going to give him one anyways. Dan Steinberg is the co-founder of Emporium Presents and a 25-year veteran concert promoter. He's been nominated for the Bill Graham Promoter of the Year award for the last 4 years in a row by Polestar magazine, promoting more than 650 shows throughout North America last year. Dan has literally worked with everybody from Cheech and Chong to Scorpions, Trailer Park Boys, and Dolly Parton, just to name a few. You can find all of his musings and Promoter 101 thoughts on Twitter @TheJew.
For the past 4 years, Luke Pierce has been an artist manager and event producer at Works Entertainment. He got his start in the business 6 years ago. After a brief stint at a telecommunication advisory firm and startup in Los Angeles, where he was offered a job with David Britz at Stiletto Entertainment. David, Luke, and Cindy left Stiletto Entertainment to form Works in 2012. A recent transplant to Nashville, Tennessee, he manages the country vocal band Home Free, Taylor Davis, and Alex and Sierra, in addition to supporting the careers of Brian Culbertson and Straight No Chaser, and is a talent buyer and event producer for the Brian Culbertson Napa Valley Jazz Getaway. He's a proud Penn Stater and loves all things Yingling and hot chicken, and can be found with his ramblings on Twitter @WLukePierce.
Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of Promoter 101. For those of you who haven't been following Dan on Twitter @TheJew, you've missed about a year's worth of documented experiences in the music business, with Dan tweeting his anonymous anecdotes, funny, frustrating, and exciting alike. This podcast is the audio form of those tweets. Dan, what in the world made you want us to do this on a weekly basis?
We were having so much fun at the conferences with the panels and the interviews and the hanging at the bar. It just seemed so wasted not to get to hang with everybody and interact with them more often. The podcast is going to allow us to do that, Luke.
What can people expect from us on a weekly basis?
I think it's going to give us an opportunity to talk about the industry's highs, lows, and some of the best people we know, and reach out to some of our friends and maybe even a couple of our enemies. Talk a little bit, and maybe talk a little bit of shit too. But I think we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to learn a little bit at the same time. Let's go ahead and talk about what happened this week in rock and roll.
Bob Dylan won a Nobel Prize for Literature. He got to open for the Stones and pick up a plaque.
Jack Eustace is finally going away. He's becoming a ward of the state, and he's going to be a guest of theirs for a very long time. I'm just wondering, now that this is all said and done, which creditor gets first crack at those big fake boobs of his ex-wives. Luke, have you seen those things?
I haven't been around Polestar long enough to see those, but I can't imagine her walking through the lobby of the bar of Bar Lines or the JW Marriott in Los Angeles.
I think that predated even the JW Marriott, but back in the old Century Plaza Hotel, I remember those things popping up. Anyway, moving on.
Drake got a boo-boo this week. He rolled his ankle and ended up having to cancel the rest of his tour, heading home to Canada. Speaking of kings of streaming, Amazon launched its unlimited streaming service, creatively titled Amazon Music Unlimited. They're offering another streaming alternative. There's now something more than Domino's and LaCroix that I can ask Alexa to order.
Congratulations to our friends Darren Leszczynski, Roger LeBlanc, Jay Williams, and Major Bob Doyle, respectfully cleaning up at this week's IEBO Awards in Nashville. Well done, gentlemen.
And congrats to anyone who survived the ensuing drinks at Bar Lines of the Omni.
High, lows, and what the fuck. This is a segment we'll talk about this week's Polestar box office scores. The highs, the top 3 shows, the bottom 3 shows, and the outliers that were like, why did you report that? Who were you trying to piss off?
Why don't we kick it off with the highs? This week's Polestar reporting for the week ending October 14th, as reported by Polestar magazine, the top 3 concerts by gross. Coming in number 1, Coldplay, with 2 sold-out shows at the Rose Bowl Stadium, August 20 to 22nd, grossing $10.9 million. Followed up by Adele, with 6 sold-out shows at Madison Square Garden for a bunch of mid-September dates, grossing $9.8 million. Finally, the Jason Aldean Kid Rock package, 2 Fenways. That's 2 Fenways in Boston, Massachusetts for $6 million in sales. Dan, how you feeling about this?
You got to give it up for Kid Rock and Jason Aldean. That's really impressive. 6 nights with Adele at Madison Square Garden. Give it up for the Bowery guys for rocking it on that one. And Coldplay, well, there's no accounting for taste, but hey, they sold the tickets, right?
And now for this week's lows. The worst performing concerts by gross is reported by Polestar. Style and Complete, playing at the intersection in Grand Rapids. $5 tickets, sold 82% of the house. The band's starting to build, actually. Further Seems Forever, playing in Brighton Music Hall on July 29th. 106 paid for a gross of $1,608. And finally, rounded out, Pat McGee at Brighton Music Hall in Boston, Massachusetts, playing on July 29th. A measly 14% of the room sold, a gross of $1,562.
72 paid. It's Pat McGee has seen better days. The worst show of the week.
And now for this week's What the Fuck.
So the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas. Show the Dream Team. 6% of the house. Who were you guys trying to piss off with that one? Luke, when somebody reports a show like that, they're truly trying to get under somebody else's skin, right? There's no other reason to report a show like that, right?
There's absolutely no reason to report a show like that. Now, I bet this show still probably grossed 30, 40, 50 grand, but there's no way that I want to have my artist, with a Polestar history that has 6% paid in a room that big. That's just frankly embarrassing.
I don't know. Well, maybe the guys from Star Promotion will reach out to us and tell us who they were trying to piss off with that one. Anyway, 6%. You guys probably booked a venue that was too big for the act to begin with, so you're probably the idiots for that one, but who knows? 6% of a house. Wow. Anyway, got great stuff coming up. The legendary Tom Ross took time to talk to me and Luke this week, and it's a great interview coming up for you next. Very excited to have Tom Ross with us today, the legendary agent that goes back to the early days that started the industry with the names like Bill Graham and old school shit like Jefferson Airplane, the legends. Good to have you here, Tom. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, nice to be with you, Steiny. I'm honored to have a chance to talk to a little bit of a younger audience than I'm used to. So it's nice to see you building up a new base of young, aggressive promoters that are the next generation.
It's a lot of fun.
I bet. That's how we all got into this business, because it was fun. Unfortunately, everyone kind of forgot that in the last, as it turned to greed and Madison Avenue, I think they've lost sight of that.
Very cool. Can we talk about 1968, starting at APA, what that was like?
Sure. It was an unbelievable time of bands being discovered. There were bands everywhere in Los Angeles. Laurel Canyon was the haven at that time for a bevy of artists that are still around today, but they kind of all convened and lived in this canyon there, Topanga Canyon, but it was kind of like the place where musicians could hang out, and the hippie culture was all present, and social times were such that although there were others, there were a couple of smaller agencies and oddball acts, but for the most part, we could fill up the Winterland Ballroom, the Fillmore East and West in the beginning days, and so we had quite a thing going on at that time. And over the next, I would say, year, 1969, I think we lost Three Dog Night and Steppenwolf, and William Morris said, they went to William Morris, and William Morris said, I think this rock and roll thing is sticking around, and lines around the Whiskey A Go-Go at that time were growing larger and larger, and the fan base was exploding across the country, and so other agencies started to pop up, but it all really started with APA. They were the first major agency to start booking this kind of music and saying there's something going on here, if I can use a tune from one of our famous artists.
And that first day for you at APA, it sounded like it was something incredibly special. You met a lot of great people, Bill Thompson, Bill Siddons, that can take us back and walk us through what that first day was like in APA and that agency during that time and what you experienced.
Well, it was a transformational day in my life, that's for sure. I went, I had interviewed way back in September, and they said, well, we don't really have any openings, but we'll keep your name here on file, and we'll let you know if anything opens up. And there were no mail rooms then. And I guess end of October, I got a call, and they said,
Wait a minute. Tom, have you been booking bands longer than there was mail? Is that what you just said?
No. I said there was no mail room.
Okay.
So they didn't have like a training ground of, we'll put you in the mail room first.
Okay, I thought you were just taking credit for being there when they started booking Moses.
Yes. Well, he was one of our reserve acts. When people didn't get down the mountain, we used Moses.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. So what basically happened was they said, come on in. November 4th was my first day, 1968. And he said, they told me, just listen on the phone. There was a fellow named Larry Heller, and he was my guardian angel, and he would take phone calls, and I would pick up the other line and hear the dialogue between promoter and agent, and he would tell me, yes, you can book the airplane, yes, you can book the Jefferson Airplane on this date, and we had the Chambers brothers, we had the Byrds, we had Eric Burden, we had War, we had Taj Mahal and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, one of the early blues people, John Lee Hooker. They had a lot of acts, and it was really fun just listening in. And then about 2:30 in the afternoon, they said, well, we have a meeting coming up with the Jefferson Airplane. Would you like to sit in? And I said, oh, that would be amazing. And, I knew who they were, and we went into this big office, and there were too many people in the group to fit in all the chairs, so they just kind of sat on the floor, and I took a place on the floor. And I would say within 30 seconds of the door being shut, Paul Kantner lit up a joint and started passing it around the room. And I saw this thing in slow motion going across the room, and I'm saying, it's coming to me. What am I going to do if I partake in the fun? I'm going to be fired by the agency, and if I don't partake, they're going to think I'm a narc.
So what happened? What happened? This is great.
And so, of course, I, don't bogart that joint. Give it to me.
Awesome.
And, I took it, and I wasn't really that experienced that I was used to. They did things like ice packing it, and they knew how to get the best out of their pot in those days, weed, pot, whatever. And it really, my eyes must have looked like a map of the road map of Los Angeles. I mean, they were bright red. I knew they were bright red. It was powerful stuff for that time. And anyhow, we were talking about dates and cities and chats and what they wanted to do. And we were getting along famously. And then I would say halfway through the meeting, all of a sudden the door opens, and one of the other agents from another department said, Tom, can we see you out here? And I'm going, oh my gosh, why are they singling me out? I'm busted. They're going to throw me out. And what they wanted was for me to deliver some script to a producer up in Bel Air. And they said, get this, the guy's waiting for his airplane. He's going to fly to London. You got to deliver the script. And I just was looking at the ground. I didn't want them to see my multicolored eyes. So, I took the script. I ran out. I got to my car, and I said, what did they say? Where am I supposed to go? And I drove around Bel Air for about 2 hours. And I drove around, and I couldn't find the place. And I would say I finally got him the script, but he missed his plane. He was waiting at the gate screaming at me, you idiot, I missed my plane. I needed this. And so I sorrowfully went home and called Larry Heller and said, Larry, I guess I blew it. I guess I shouldn't come back into the office tomorrow. He said, what do you mean you blew it? I said, well, I didn't deliver the script on time. And he said, forget the script. He said, the Jefferson Airplane loves you. They want you to be their agent.
Well done.
And that was awesome. My first day in showbiz. I said, I love showbiz. And I was covering a date within 4 days down in Anaheim. And I think it was for the Chambers brothers. And I flew up to San Francisco, and the airplane was playing Fillmore West. And somebody in the office had filled out the contracts and put down one show. And so I called Bill Graham. We were at the KFRC radio station in San Francisco, the one up on the hill. And I called Mr. Graham. I thought it was Billy Graham, the evangelist. I didn't know. Mr. Graham, this is Tom Ross calling, and I'm here with the airplane, and what time would you like us there for our set? And all of a sudden, this barrage of language and screaming saying, it's a tradition, it's 2 sets, it's always 2 sets. What do you mean 1 set? And I said, excuse me, sir, I don't want to be rude, but you signed a contract that says 1 set. That's all you're getting. And Bill and I started off on a not good note, and he was screaming, and I was thinking that I was doing the right thing. And I said, well, you're getting 1 set. You can get, tell me now whether you want us there at 8 or you want us there at 10. And the next minute, this barrage of language, and the band's right there. I'm saying, oh, everything's great. Everything's great. A little embarrassed, and I called.
Did you play 2 sets that night?
I called the office, and they told me, oh, no, we made a mistake. It's always 2 shows. So I ate crow my first weekend representing the band, but they laughed because they knew Bill, and they knew how he likes to intimidate people, especially agents. And we had a very battling relationship for most of his life. I think the last year and a half, we kind of figured out we were kind of alike, and we had some good times. But we got into lawsuits because anything that was anywhere near San Francisco, that was his turf. And I would book Stanford, I'd book Sacramento, and as a matter of fact, I sold Randy Phillips, who used to be at AEG. Randy Phillips was at Stanford. I sold him a date. I think it was Loggins to Messina, and it caused a whole big lawsuit, and eventually Stanford won, and they said, you don't own us, and we're playing the date. But Bill was quite a character, and he used to love bullying the artist and the managers, and he was an actor. He really loved putting on the do. But that was
you could see him in Bugsy, right?
What?
He was in Bugsy. He was actually an actor in Bugsy.
That's no doubt about it. They couldn't have picked a better guy. He was a tough guy. He was tough in negotiations. He was a hands-on player. He could build a stage himself if he had to.
You had told a story at CIC when I was a youngster in the business. You had the keynote, and you told a fabulous story about, I believe it was the Jefferson Airplane playing 2 nights at the Fillmore and Bill Graham. Would you kick that off?
That story was at Winterland in San Francisco, the Winterland Ballroom. That was the step up from the Fillmore. It was the right place to play. They were huge in San Francisco, and so we did a weekend. And the Friday night, I was backstage, and the band's on playing, and I said, I'm going to go back and check the box office, and I kind of wormed my way through the building and went through the crowd and got to the front of the building and the box office and said, God, Bill, it's really packed. How many people do we got? And he looked at me with glaring eyes. He could definitely sink a battleship when he would stare you down like, what are you, an idiot? He said, 6,200 people. That's all the walls hold. Why do you agents always ask and try to push around that I'm selling extra tickets? It's 6,200 sold. I said, okay, I just asked. I was back here. It looked good. The next night, Saturday night, I couldn't go through the crowd. I had to go around the building. I went out the backstage door and walked all around to the box office. And I go, Bill, how many people are here tonight? You can't move in there. And he said, Tom, do I have to teach you everything? He said, 6,200 people. That's it. Bigger people, Saturday night. And I looked at him knowing that was a lie, but he was Bill Graham. So in San Francisco, he ruled, and I wasn't going to mess with it that night.
Well, he certainly
Other nights
wrote the
we
book.
got into it. But yeah, those were fun days of discovery, and there was a lot of promoters who weren't promoters. They were just P.T. Barnums and quick money. And luckily, we got through the days of people, who were trying to do tickets with, a roll of tickets. They just bought like you would do at a carnival. And we started actually doing drop counts where you'd have to, after the show, count all the deadwood, one at a time, 6,000, 8,000. I spent my honeymoon. I came back from my honeymoon to cover a date, again, for the Jefferson Airplane in San Bernardino with a promoter long gone, but he was notorious for not giving accurate counts. And my wife and I we bought clickers, and she was at one door and I was at the other, and the numbers didn't match what the box office had. And we said, well, we're not going on until we agree that the number of people in this building is on the same number as our clickers add up.
It's a pretty good bluff. At some point you give up, right?
No, you never give up. I mean, that was the one thing I think that if I had a good career, it was that I really realized that I was a fiduciary for the act. The act, it was a naive business. I used to find out that the what we would call MOR, middle of the road acts, would play the same facility and they'd walk out with twice the money. And so as the business started with these, quote, rock and roll hippies, the promoters said, oh, these guys are idiots. They won't know what we're doing. And they were taking advantage, and I realized my coming was to say, if Victor Borga sells out and makes X amount at this dollar ticket, then that's going to be the same payout to my acts. And it was even an internal battle within the agency because there was the rock department and the middle of the road department, and there was the Letterman and the Kingston Trio. They were legitimate, and then there was the illegitimate, and I was king of the illegitimate.
The king of the illegitimate. That's great.
That's a pretty incredible paradigm shift that you were a part of there for that time in the business. Today we think of everything in gross receipts and percentage of it. It's bizarre to think that there was a time where it was standardized otherwise. It's incredible that you saw.
The standard was a flat fee. It started with just a flat fee, and when these acts, they just wanted to play. We went from clubs to these arenas, and they were happy if they got 7,500 flat.
How do we get back there again?
Most of the deals were, so they took a flat fee, and then we said, you know what? We're doing big business. The grosses are much bigger, and that's when I realized when I started really looking at it as a business, that, hey, we're getting taken advantage of, and I'm going to change things. And, it went to 50% of the gross and 60% of the gross to, it continued to change so that today it's 95.5 or who knows what. But, the promoters would have curtains that you would be charged for, yet they owned the curtains, and there were all kinds of scams. They owned the limo company, and they owned the catering company. It took years to suss out all the little scams and all the various promotions. And as the promoters got into it, some were good and legit, and some were just, they'd do 4 shows. And we even had a promoter come in from Santa Barbara. They left. They looked pretty scuzzy. They were kind of from the hills, and they left $7,500 as a deposit, and they never came back. It was like, gee, I'm sorry I told the band about it. And they never played a date. I don't know if they got arrested or they disappeared or went over the border, but it took a long time to suss out a real industry, and that's where, promoters started to get their territorial rights, if you will. Don't you dare come into Denver without Barry Fay, or Philadelphia without Larry Magid. And bit by bit, it became a business, and the acts started being represented with a little more accuracy and a little more detail on exactly what they needed, and a little more accuracy on how we would settle and what was, it used to be the promoter would send the expenses of the building to the agent. And why would an agent know what the rent was? It was only when the territorial agent switched that we saw rents changing, because they never thought the two agents that used to have the territory would talk to the new territorial agent and say, yeah, that building's a 15% rent. And they said, really? They told me it was 20. I said, well.
That's amazing.
So there was a lot of stuff going on, but
and the offers were done different, right? People would actually call in and you do the offers line by line over the phone, right? You take them verbally.
Absolutely. Yep. We would, as a matter of fact, we would make up our own offer sheet so you could put all the columns and the rent, the security, and
so getting competing offers from a couple promoters would really take a lot of time.
Yep, that was then. Then faxes came about. We started faxing offers. But all of this used to be just pencil and paper.
And were there a lot of competing promoters? I know in San Francisco you had the Family Dog and you had Bill, but across the country, was there a lot of promoters fighting for shows back in the earlier days of the late 60s, early 70s?
Oh, yeah. As the genre, as the business grew and records were popping and more acts were popping, I mean, we used to put whoever we wanted as the opening act. It was a 3-act show. And, so you could break an act and nobody really cared. It was like kind of a free-for-all. And nobody even thought of, hey, that spot is worth something. Getting this new band on the thing, we ought to charge them for being on the tour. We're going to draw all the people. And then as the acts went, and then you started getting the radio stations that wanted to be the co-presenting stations, and promoters tied in with radio stations, and there were lots of promoters who were, in the market saying, I want to do shows in Seattle. There were 3 different promoters. In LA, I think we had 3 major promoters and 2 semi-major promoters. San Diego had many, 2-3 guys that had their own formula of, how they could get rich quick. And Barry Fay had Marty Wolf and Joel Brandis, who were competing with him from time to time. Salt Lake has always, I think, been Jim McNeil for the most part. There was a college network. There was a guy named Van Tonkin who would buy for 30 colleges at a time. So he could pick one act and deliver 30 acts, and you could break a band if you got the Van Tonkin College Tour. And he had big credibility with the colleges because they didn't know the business, so he would convince them, I'll deliver the shows, and you turn over your building to me. He scammed a lot of money from a lot of schools, but it was good for the business. It gave you those Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday shows, and you built a foundation. From the agent's point of view, what you were trying to do is bust out of a city and spread their name and spread their reputation as a good band, and that happened. I mean, Philadelphia was Hall & Oates. Van Halen was L.A. Journey, San Francisco. New Jersey, I don't even have to tell you. But, everybody had their roots, and you would kind of spread it. It was easier on the East Coast because obviously there were major cities 400 miles apart. It was a little more difficult. You got L.A. in the Northwest. That worked well. You could pretty well route a tour and do 10, 12 dates and do the Bellinghams and the Spokanes and the, Eugenes, and come on down to Sacramento, then San Francisco, and then Fresno and L.A., San Diego, and pretty soon you had a, 2-week tour you could do just on a coast. And then you had the ability to start building a band's reputation. So it was an interesting time.
You got to work with so many great names over the years. Legendary, classic names.
I was very blessed. Classic. You name it. And, I spent 3 years at APA, and then I left them because they wouldn't let me sign a band at 10%. They insisted on 15%. Can you imagine that, an agency getting 15%? And then I went to Associated Booking, and I worked with Johnny Podell on the East Coast, and we had B.B. King and the Allman Brothers and all of the Phil Walden Capricorn acts, which was Leonard Skinner, and Alice Cooper was part of it, and Irving Azoff I hired at ABC, and he brought Dan Fogelberg, and he was working with REO way back then. He brought him out here from Champaign, Illinois, and went to work for Jerry Heller, and I stole Irving, and he came over. We were the West Coast, and we did pretty well for Associated Booking. And then later I went to ICM to work with Danny Weiner, except Danny Weiner was at IFA. They merged with CMA, so that became ICM. And Danny, I went and said, now I'm going to get really legit. I'm going to work with Danny. And about, I would say, a month after the merger, Danny said, I'm out of here. I'm going up to Monterey.
So Fred and Dan took off right then to start Monterey?
Yep. That was probably, let's see, I started in 68, 3 years. It was probably around 74. And he's been there ever since and had a great career. And I actually, there was a fellow named Hal Lazarus and myself, and we were the only Indians. Everybody else was vying to be department head. They were all, they had one or two acts, and they said, you're going to vote for me, right? And Hal and I looked at each other and saying, clearly we're the only guys who are not going to be a department head. And Hal and I went to work, and we booked every act on ICM's roster. And they had about 100 bands. We had Aerosmith, we had Hall & Oates, we had Styx, we had, a lot of major, we had the Airplane, of course. We had...
Carpenters and Olivia Newton-John, too, right?
Yeah. We had the MOR acts. We had Danny took the Doobie Brothers, but I think we had Chicago for a good couple of years left. And, we had major acts, but we just booked them. And all these guys who wanted to be department head ended up one at a time burning out, being fired. And I said, you know what, I'm working too hard. I'm going to go. And I basically was going up to Monterey to join Danny. I rented a house, and we made a deal, and I was going to move up there and become a health nut, ride my bike to the office. And I got one of those offers you couldn't turn down, in fact, from the heads of ICM. And so they said, you'll run the department and, come back. And I got a better salary. And so then I became the head of ICM on the West Coast. And the Beach Boys were there. Chip Racklin, who's still around, he had the Beach Boys. We had America. And we had a good run. I lasted 10 years at ICM. And everybody said, the merger, they're going to get, all these bands, they can't handle it. They're going to lose them. Well, we didn't double, but we ended up keeping all those bands and making it even larger. And we had a good run, but it was a public company. I didn't like working for a public company. Every year there was, you did great, but the film department didn't. You did great, but the furniture division or the radio division didn't. So after 10 years, I was looking to get out of there. But we had a great run. One of my most fun acts was, it was owned by Marvin Josephson, who owned the rights to Captain Kangaroo. And so Buffalo Bob went on the road after, I would say, it was probably 8th or 9th year that I was there. And so he'd go on the road and do the show. And I taught him how to relate to the younger audiences. And he was like when I grew up as a kid with, Clarabelle and some of his children's aunties. They still lived on. He was kind of a cool college act. And he was part owner of ICM. He was the original partner of Marvin Josephson. Anyhow, after 10 years, I figured, I'm tired of hearing the corporate line and wanted to do something else. And that it made me look for another move. And I knew a move to William Morris was just another lateral move. I had been department head. And the opportunity to start from ground zero with CAA came up, and that's where I ended up for the rest of my career, which
I've got to say something about something to be learned from the work ethic that you brought every day to ICM, and the fact that, as you mentioned, there were many Indians and a lot of people trying to seek to be chief over there. And I think that there's something to be said about you famously getting into the office early in the day and working harder than most people. And it's incredible that it permeated the culture of the agency world where it's become so fast-paced and crazed. And I think, do you think that you and your work ethic and what you strive to create at ICM, still carries on today? And do you think there's any lessons that we can learn from, as younger people in the business, from putting our heads down and working hard?
Well, I'm proud of the work ethic. I mean, definitely wouldn't have happened. People often forget this. You're in the office 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. You stay till 6 or 7 at night, and then your day starts after being on the phone all day and doing your work. Then you got to go out, and you got to be with the bands and service the bands, and it's a long day, and anybody can catch a hit act. That's just the luck of the draw. But to be able to do it year after year and be able to sustain a career, there's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of temptation out there while you're on the road, while you're on top. There's a lot of distractions. That's what kind of got us all in the business, the fun. But you also have to have a mindset of, a lot of people are depending on me. There's 100 people on this crew. And my job is to maximize their opportunity to not only make money and pay their crew and pay their truckers and pay the, entire organization. It's expensive. It has gotten more and more expensive. So I was proud of the fact that we lost a lot of good agents, and some people burned out and some people moved on. But I love being an agent. It's one of the big dichotomies is you represent the client, but you spent most of your day with the promoter. Those were my friends, for years. I had great relationships, great stories, and built trust. And, if they said it, we didn't really demand deposits. I mean, you knew who you were dealing with. If you needed a deposit, you got a deposit. If not, they would send 10% because you were doing such a volume of business with them that you didn't want to tie up all their capital. You just wanted the safety valve, the ability to get your act paid. And then there were the other guys who were like, I don't know who you are. You're going to have to show me that you're solvent and financially capable and have the ability to be a promoter. When you asked the question earlier about were there more than one promoter in the market, there were people that, really did things differently. When you put their ad in the newspaper, they had a whole different ad design. And people would respond, the public would respond, oh, that's a David Forrest show, or oh, that's a Bill Graham show. The strip ads kind of started to put the dullness into the into the business. I mean, people didn't want to be advertised on a strip ad, coming next week, so-and-so. So you were trying to, part of making a career is being able to have impact in the city and stand out from the rest. So, who's at the forum this week? Who cares? There's another act the following week. How do you make yourself be distinguished? And,
So a great example of that was Bill Graham's posters in San Francisco, or how Hatches does the Ryman.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And a lot of those touches, I think, have been lost. Unfortunately, the selling out to Madison Avenue gave a lot of my friends a big paycheck that they weren't exactly hurting, and they weren't exactly financially in need, but they never really thought there was an end game where they could walk out with a giant payday. And rolling up the business gave a lot of people that end game, and they made a lot of money for years of work, but it took the creativity right out of the business.
Yeah, but a good retirement plan for a lot of guys that didn't have a W-9 sitting there.
Most of those guys had plenty.
Oh, yeah.
There weren't benefits being asked for most promoters. There were a few, but it's left the business in a position where you have new promoters that can't compete with buying a whole tour for $500,000. Where do you get that kind of backing? So it's
it's
a shame
not
because
it's not easy to build from square one to be a concert promoter these days. It's the borders to
no,
entry.
That's why I'm so pleased to be part of the show and help you and your friends and allies to build the next generation of acts, because we're even though the desert trip is this weekend, I mean, we're losing people. We're losing the fans for those people because they're dying out. The baby boom is in their 70s or late 60s, and the music business has always been about young people. And, as much as I miss it, I realize it's not about me and my group. It's about the kids and grandkids being able to discover their own music. I'm thrilled that a lot of the music that I was around for still lives on. But on the other hand, it's kind of, there aren't superstars coming out that are really going to replace them. Hopefully you're going to find them, Steiny. That's why I'm talking to you. You got to go and get the next group of recruits.
Well, I got to take advantage of this since we're talking to you. Obviously, CAA is a big part of your world, and you helped found that agency. Did you read the book, The Powerhouse CAA?
Oh, of course I did. Of course I did. I had very ambivalent feelings. I honestly didn't really want to talk about all those days. They were kind of in the past, and I'm kind of over with. And it was a bitter pill to swallow, to have something you loved so much, and boom, the rug got pulled. And it's amazing how quick people forget your name and forget the favors you did, and it doesn't take long for people to move on to the next guy, and that's business. It happens in a lot of businesses. But my soul, and really, we did things so differently at CAA, and a lot of people don't like Michael Ovitz, but I'll tell you, he was the greatest manager. I learned more from him about the game and about how to play the game, and I thought I was intense and was good, but when I got to CAA, I upped my game. I mean, and one at a time, I built players. I picked off the best people out there, and those were my partners. Rob Light and Mike Peranian and Bobby Brooks. Even Mitch Rose was our first homegrown home run. Those were the people those were my partners, not the partners I ended up with who I didn't get along with and were upset that I was attacking Bob Sillerman, this billionaire on Wall Street. And that was a bitter pill, but things progress. And
would you say the book got it right?
Yeah. I mean, the conclusion, I don't know, the last, 200 pages, obviously the current partners didn't share in wanting to be part of the book. There's really, at the end of it, you go, well, why'd they write this? But Mike Ovitz and Ron Meyer, they did things that were light years ahead of where the business currently is. I mean, all the sports, Michael Ovitz wanted to do that. I would say I started there in 84, and 89 he was having conversations of we should be in the sporting business and the Coca-Cola ad business. I mean, he found new areas of income for the agencies, which now is what the agency business is, but he was light years ahead. He violated the golden rule of reading and believing his own press. One of the problems of the business is, you represent people that are supposed to be in the press, and you're supposed to be behind the scenes. And that was always the golden rule. Don't let your artist feel that who are you working on, your press or their press? And obviously it's supposed to be for them. And Michael, I guess, got carried away, but I mean, he did brilliant things and taught me how to build a department, and he had to approve every single person I hired. Not that he never turned me down, but at the same time, he had a culture there that he wanted everyone to fit into, and we would go to these retreats, and once a year, he was like Newt Rockney. I mean, we left there so empowered that we had done things that nobody had ever done before. And, people would come to us in the music world and say, well, we're not ready for you. And I said, yes, you are. You're a star, and we can make it happen quicker. And we had, we were the first agency to start working on building managers. I said, we don't have that many acts. I want every guy in their territory to find out who the building manager is and have dialogue with them. How's your kids? What are you doing this weekend? Who's coming to town? And by building a real relationship where you could have a conversation with the guy where it wasn't just, hey, I'm looking for open dates in October. The guy knew when we called, they paid attention because we were all very much into the business and wanted to be the best at it that anybody ever could be. And that tradition clearly has carried on. It's a little too big right now. I mean, I think that's why there's, room for new agencies and new promoters, because it's gotten out of hand and you can't represent a list. Artists want to be represented, by a guy who they know they can trust and will be working on them 24/7. Not, well, we submitted you on the list, they didn't pick you. And I think, like I say, you heard my background. I've been at big agencies and little agencies. I can give the rap for both. But I think the power base is a little lopsided now. The big agencies, they're a little too big. The list is intimidating, to say the least, and people go, gee, if I leave here, what will happen? That's not good for creativity. That's not good for spreading the wealth.
Very Jerry Maguire.
Well, somewhat, yep. Yes, indeed.
So you've been retired for quite a bit now. You have any interest in ever dipping your toes back in the business?
Well, oddly enough, the book made me talk about things I haven't really talked about in 10 or 15 years, and the passion and the hunger is kind of coming back. I've had some interesting conversations of late. I've always been a pundit of the business. I never gave it up. I can still tell you what's going on better than most people on the street, and I have a lot of friends still in the business. So I don't know. Never say never. I know that I'll never be a manager, but there's other ways and maybe some new ways. So I still find it an amazing opportunity to be in show business. That's, Jimmy Niederlander had one of the great quotes of my life, and that is, everybody's got two businesses, their own and showbiz. And
Love
it's true. You never, the excitement of being an agent was you never knew when you walked in your office whether it was a road manager, a tour manager, or the guy next door, who's going to hand you that tape that's like, this is unbelievable. This is a star.
Excellent.
And that's the excitement that we all go after every day of our life, to find that next giant act.
Absolutely. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Would you come back and talk to us again? I know we're just scratching the surface of your stories, and I think our viewers would love to hear it.
Well, if you got viewers that want more, come back. I'll do an encore.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
My
Tom.
pleasure.
It was great.
Nice talking with you.
And that wraps it up for the first episode of Promoter 101. Thanks to everybody for listening in today.
If you've got any questions or thoughts, reach out to us at Steiny@promoter101.net. Let us know what you're thinking. If there's any guests you think we should have on and you just want to tell us how badly we suck at this.
Make sure to follow Dan at The Jew on Twitter, and I'm Luke Pierce at WLukePierce on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you listen to next week, our guest will be Nederlander Concerts Marketing Vice President Jamie Loeb.